The Coen brothers keep coming this week on Hell of a Picture as we dive into the 1987 screwball comedy, Raising Arizona. We open up the show this week by discussing the comedic influences of the film and how it manages to make horrible crimes both funny and endearing. I talk about the semi-fantastical setting of the film, while Dave touches on its political leanings. We talk about the American dream, the baby boom of 80s film, and the movie's message of hope. Before we begin, did you get your dip-tet shot? You need to get your dip-tet shot. That's this week on Hell of a Picture. Welcome to Hell of a Picture, a movie podcast where we discuss an unforgettable film and if it truly is a hell of a picture. My name is Andrew Bartlett and I'm sitting across the internet as I do each and every episode from the High McDonough to my Leonard Smalls, Mr. David Hollinshurst.
Yeah, very good. Wow. It's an interesting pairing. Could have gone with the brothers. Could have gone with the John Goodman, William Forsythe pairing, but you went with
Snots.
Sort of the... Yeah, that's right. The aptly named.
That's right. The Snots brothers.
Great.
I went with the because we're at opposite end of the spectrum. We debate hard, and we're fast talking and terrifying at the same time.
That's right.
But those are characters
You've encapsulated us perfectly. Well done.
I think I have. We're talking about Raising Arizona this week in our little Coen Brothers run, which we've done, Blood Simple last week, their debut film, and we follow it up with their sophomore film, Raising Arizona, which is a stark difference from Blood Simple. You're going from a neo-noir crime film to a zany, over-the-top comedy. So couldn't have been any different.
Yeah, it is very, very, very stark contrast. But as I think we will get into in our discussion, there are some similarities, and definitely some things to discuss there in terms of the overlap, and I guess like just a different approach to similar ideas, and really shows the versatility of the Coens as filmmakers, as writers, as directors. So yeah, it's a cool follow-up. I really appreciate what they did here in terms of a sophomore effort. Yeah,
their ability to sort of take a stab at a completely different genre, and see what their influences are and where they can take it was definitely interesting to see after Blood Simple. So
yeah, bold.
We got a lot bold, very bold. We have a lot to get to today. So as we do each week, why don't we start with catching everybody up on this almost 40-year-old film with The Rundown.
Indeed. The Rundown. H.I. McDonough is a good old boy who just can't help but do wrong. A recidivist of non-violent convenience store robberies, High seems fated to repeat his mistakes over and over again, doing short-term stints in the joint and even shorter ones on the outside. Until one day, High breaks the cycle by proposing to Edwina, a police officer he has slowly courted over his many trips to the clink. Now, High and Ed get married and look to start a new family, but when they are told they cannot conceive, the tragedy drives them to do something rash. Now, the well-publicized birth of quintuplets gets the couple thinking, and they abduct one of the 5 children belonging to the Arizona family. Now, this sets off a madcap series of events involving High and Ed, 2 escaped convicts, an outlaw manhunter, and, of course, a baby. Raising Arizona was released in 1987. It was written, directed, and produced by the brothers Coen. It stars ya boy Nicolas Cage as H.I. High McDonough, Holly Hunter as Edwina Ed McDonough, John Goodman as Gale, and William Forsythe as Evil, the brothers Snots, I think is the... And lastly, Randall Cobb as the terrifying in some regards and also hilarious Leonard Smalls. Now, this was the not-so-immediate follow-up to Blood Simple. The two films were separated by 3 years, and as we mentioned, even more so by their respective natures. Now, though there are some traces of comedy to be found in Blood Simple, the Coens go full bore in this outing, evoking slapstick and absurdist humor, as well as what I think would become sort of a trademark of theirs, with just downright clever exchanges of dialogue that might not even read as a joke to some people, but if you have the taste for it, it really tickles. As Blood Simple announced to the world that these guys understand tone and how to create it, Raising Arizona similarly proclaimed that the brothers get comedy. And the tendrils of this film will stretch well into the future of their filmography, from overt comedies like The Big Lebowski and Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, to the more intense No Country for Old Men, which I think we both agreed had its share of laughs. And that is your rundown.
Well said. Raising Arizona, yeah, it's certainly slapsticky and absurdist. Yes. And let's begin our discussion with with a quote I found from Joel Coen. He said, Raising Arizona was a chance for us to experiment with different genres and styles. We wanted to push the boundaries of what a comedy could be, both visually and narratively. So, I mean, right off the bat, we see the stark difference between this and Blood Simple, but we can, again, see the influence with this fast-paced, witty dialogue, slapstick humor that you would kind of equate to like a 30s, 40s comedy, these quick-witting talks and, all these sort of stuff. But then you also have this, like, mix that with this, like, really zany, absurd, cartoonish comedy, like physical comedy. Like, I'm thinking specifically about, the chase scene where High is getting, he goes to get the diapers and then he ends up robbing the bank, and then it just becomes this like crazy over
convenience
the top.
Store. He only robs convenience stores. He's a specialist.
Right. Sorry. Yes. And he, and then it becomes this, the cops are chasing him, and then he's going through the grocery store, and then the dogs are chasing him, and it's right. Like way over the top. The music's playing, and he's like, what is happening? And then, again, later in the film, when he finally comes, face to face with Leonard Smalls, and they have that huge fight, which is so over the top, to the point where Leonard Smalls ends up getting like blown up by like dynamite. Like, what? Like, it's incredible. And you could just see that sort of different styles of comedy kind of meshing into this one surrealist experience.
Yeah, well, it's kind of like if the Three Stooges had the special effects, at their disposal that filmmakers in the 80s had. It's like if you meshed that with Looney Tunes, you know what I mean? Because like it is this like very sort of fundamental physical comedy. Like you see it in that fight scene in the trailer with the brothers and High, and they're banging into stuff. Yeah. There's fists going through walls. They're it's very fundamental in that way. And yet then you also get this cartoonish additive, like you said, like with Leonard Smalls being blown up by the grenades. And it is like Wile E. Coyote. He has this look, before it blows up, where it's just like blink, blink. Like, you could almost see him taking out an umbrella to brace for an anvil falling on his head. It is so heightened and cartoonish. And yeah, it's just, it is this wild blend of comedy, because you have that. And then you also have what I think is really the Coen mainstay, which is just the witty banter, snappy repartee between characters, almost unrealistic in how good it is, but yet so believable at the same time.
Yeah, they're sort of quick-witted and but they're still dumb, I guess, in who these characters are, right?
Well, that's a question. I just want to ask you a question here.
Yeah.
Do you think that they are? Because they do this, like the Coens love an accent, first of all. They love a regional dialect, and they do this a lot. Setting is very important, right. and that kind of thing, it really contributes to the speech characters. I've heard it said that they are maybe kind of condescending to the people that they are portraying, like the Minnesotans or the North Dakota people in Fargo, right. Or the Southerners here. Do you think they are, or do you think that it's more of an homage? Do you think that they love this stuff, or are they kind of talking down to it?
No, I think they love it, man. I think it's just like, this is you know, these are, you know, for lack of a better word, like funny ways that people talk, but it's just like interesting banter, right? And then like,
Yeah.
and it's, you know, it just adds this like sort of layer, I think, to kind of these characters and how they interact with one another. And it just, you know, adds this like layer of comedy that, you know, otherwise you feel like you wouldn't, you know, you wouldn't get, you know, if they were talking without sort of this regional accent. But it also sort of places it in a specific place. And that's sort of this idea of realism and fantasy sort of meshed together, right? Because you're talking about this, like the absurdity of the picture and like sort of how it is sort of over the top. But then there's, it does sort of place it within this idea of a place that actually exists. I mean, obviously it's in Arizona, but like the choice that it's in Arizona seems like so interesting, right? Like it's not in Mississippi or Alabama or like, you know, Georgia or like Texas or like, it's like those are these sort of southern states you equate. It's like it's Arizona. Like I don't know about you, but I don't really think of Arizona as being like one of these like southern states, right? Um,
Even though it very
and
much
so
is
there's
geographically, like, you know, I mean, I
exactly right.
suppose. Yeah.
Yeah, but you know, there's this idea that like there is this sort of meshing of realism and fantasy, and that's what the Coen brothers sort of do really well in their films. You know, in researching this, I read that Ebert actually hated the film, or he
Yeah.
gave it a very like poor, you know, review. And his thing was that it was like there was this fuzziness where the film actually occurs, if it's in the real world or if it's fantastical, and like he couldn't get past that, right? Like he couldn't. It's like it needs to be one or the other. So for you, like, do you like can a film exist, specifically this film, where there is this mixture of like kind of what is real and what is fake, I guess. And it's like even in the characters, right? Like is Leonard Smalls a figment of his imagination, or does he actually exist? And we kind of learn that he is an actual person in the film.
Yeah, but I genuinely did think that he was some kind of apparition, like some kind of
Mm,
something as a part of High's, you know, subconscious or something like that.
right.
And yeah, I don't see why Ebert would get so hung up on that. It's a strange qualm to sort of have with the movie, because I like that it's kind of existing in this ambiguous place. Like, you know, it's
Yeah.
Arizona, but what part of Arizona? Like, is it, you know, is it a fantasy world? Is it a cartoon? Is it grounded in reality? Like, you know, I enjoy the ambiguity of that, and I don't think you
Yeah.
need to declare a side as a filmmaker or a storyteller. I think
I
there is
agree
room
completely.
for that kind of thing. Um, and yeah, like, I mean, the Leonard Smalls character, he is almost this aspect of High. At least I think he could be, because you do get that point at the
Yeah.
end where you see that they have the same tattoo, and so there could be this idea that is he just sort of a shady after image of High? Is he a dark reflection of him or something like that?
Well, exactly. And I mean, that's where we're first introduced to him, is Hyde talking about the dream he's had, where we get
Yeah.
introduced to this character. And like you said, and then it's like he sort of like, in the end, decides that it's like he is going to kill off this alter ego person
Yeah,
of
that's right.
himself, right? You know, and it's like this person that is pursuing, and he even when he goes to, you know, the Arizona, the father, Smalls does, and he's talking
That's
to him
Nathan, Arizona.
about
And my name
Nathan
ain't Nathan,
Arizona.
Arizona.
Obviously, Nathan Jr. is who they take. Nathan Arizona, and he goes to them, and he's talking about free market, right? Like I can't remember the exact word, but it's like the free market dictates the cost of the baby, right?
Yeah, that's
Which is
right. Yeah, if you won't pay it, the market will. Yeah.
yeah, you know, and it's like that's sort of the what how High is pursuing the kid in the first place, right? You know, he's sort of like, it's like as he comes from a place of like he wants it for the family, but then it just, yeah, it sort of becomes this sort of bargaining chip, and like Leonard is sort of the dark side of his thoughts, I guess. And that's a really good point. I never really had thought about that. But, the interesting thing about the idea of the baby in general is just this like idea that the film presents a baby as almost like a consumer good, right?
Mm.
Or a thing of desire, and that is, even in Nathan Arizona's, he's sort of using it as a way to gain popularity, to get, sell more furniture, right?
Unpainted
Um,
furniture.
that's right. And like, that's just such an interesting way. Whereas like, sort of there was a, there was a bit of a baby boom, um, comedies in the 80s, right? There was like literally a movie called Baby Boom with Diane Keaton. There's three men and a baby.
Look
There
who's
was Look Who's
talking.
Talking,
Look who's
and there's
talking
these,
too.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Mm.
There's these baby movies that sort of like, and they're all comedies, and Raising Arizona is a comedy, but this one obviously feels a way different than those.
Yeah.
Cause it's at the end, it's about kidnapping, which is like, how do you make that? So like, let me ask you that. Like, how do you make a child kidnapping feel okay or sweet? Like you're sort of on the side of Ed and High, right?
Totally. Yeah. No, you're totally invested in them and rooting for them, even though they are abducting a child, like a baby. You're stealing a baby. Like this is the work of like fairy tale villains. You know what I mean? Like there's nothing
Yes.
more
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
monstrous than the abduction and harm of a child. But yeah, somehow not only is it funny, and I think a big part of that is because immediately you set the tone of something cartoonish. Like that this is not totally real.
Right.
So establishing that tone right away gives you a little bit of latitude in terms of what you can get away with ethically. Um, it's almost as though like there's a forgiveness to absurdity. If you establish that right away, that this is
Right.
absurd, almost anything can be funny there afterwards. It gives you
Right.
it gives permission to the audience, because I felt at a couple of points I was like, hang on, like I had these moments like where of return to reality where I was like, what am I watching and what am
Yes.
I cheering for? What am I laughing at here? And yeah, somehow they pull it off. It's a very delicate thing to do, but they make it work. And not only is it funny, this movie is sweet. The ending
Yeah.
monologue, it makes an interesting statement too, because he's talking about, eventually they give the kid back. Very nice. They have
Right.
that nice exchange with Nathan Arizona. And then there's this beautiful dream sort of sequence where High is once again monologuing for us. And what he's describing is kind of like loving baby Nate from afar. Loving him as
Yes.
if he was their own, even though they have no involvement with him. He doesn't know that this happened. He has no idea, but they sort of follow his life, and he goes to university and he goes, and it's almost like they're telling us that, shouldn't we love all children that way? Shouldn't every
Mm.
child almost be thought of as our own? Like, I mean, think of like, the ideal of that, and how what a perfect world it would be if we all looked at every kid as, in the way that they will look at baby Nate from afar. And it's just this really beautiful,
Right.
sweet, ending idea in what is also just a sweet film throughout. It's touching.
Yeah. The end sort of ends on that dream again, the dream sequence from High, where he's describing all that, and realizing that like that they do the same thing in No Country, right? He ends on talking about
Mm,
his a dream that he had. Um, the sheriff Tommy Lee Jones character, but yeah, he sort of he ends on this, and then to sort of bring it back to reality. The last line he says, maybe it was a far off place. I think it was Utah,
yeah.
which again is such an interesting place to choose as like this, final line of the film. It's again, it's not this big city. It's not he brings it back and you're like, yeah, Utah. Like who's ever thinking of Utah when you're thinking of like, places where your dreams come true? But that sort of almost brings it back to a reality sort of thing, I think.
Well,
Anyway.
I mean, I think there is a strata or a cast of America that would say that Utah is like,
Ah,
the ideal. And
you're right.
because like that dream, it kind of, he's sort of describing like the American dream or the idea of the
Yes.
American dream,
Yep.
because like they couldn't conceive, this was a big like roadblock for them. But the Arizonas, they find out, had the same problem. And through fertility drugs and all this stuff, they were able to eventually have quintuplets. But,
Right.
and he sort of leaves them with that sort of parting, like, kind of stick with it message. And it's almost like, that promise of the American dream. If you work hard, anything can happen. And yeah, like there is this paradise for you, and maybe it's Utah. And Utah is also just funny because it's random and kind of silly.
Yeah, exactly.
That's sort of part of it. And this is like, it's funny because like this is a movie with political commentary and with societal commentary,
Right.
that doesn't get all bogged down in that shit. You know what I mean? Like it doesn't preach to you. It doesn't like overwhelm you with it, but it's in there, and it's in there throughout.
Mm-hmm.
Like you already touched on how like the baby is looked at as a commodity in some way, like the friends that they have over for that luncheon, which ends disastrously. Dot and Glenn, I think it is the Frances McDormand character, and her husband. They eventually want the baby. You know what I mean? They want it too. Like they've got 5 friggin' kids already, and they want it. And the refrain from High and Ed throughout is that the Arizonas have 5 kids. They've got more kids than they need, and there is this sort of class, sort of commentary there that like, the rich have more than they could ever possibly need, and other people are robbing convenience stores to get diapers, like it's, so there's a fun little commentary there without making overt commentary. It's nice.
Yeah. I mean, even the Snots brothers end up wanting the kid, right? They want it because
that's right. In a sweet way.
Like, but like you said, it doesn't get bogged down with this idea of like, but there are lines in the film where it's, the high line where he says, I tried to stand up and fly straight, but wasn't easy with that some bitch Reagan in the White House. Right.
That's right.
Which is very clear. There's another part where he says, we thought it was unfair that some should have so many while others should have so few. Right. So that idea of inequality in America is obviously very present in the film, but it's sort of tongue in cheek and sort of like nodding at it without obviously being so overt about it. But in the end, I think, like you said, like the film is at its core, like, it's about like love and family and what you'll do. There's another Ethan Coen quote that I found where he said, Raising Arizona is about the lengths people will go to for family and love. It's a story about redemption and the idea that even the most flawed individuals can find a sense of purpose and belonging. And that's sort of what we get from our characters. And, if you compare this to their other films, specifically Blood Simple, this is such an interesting companion piece to that film, because one of the big discussion points we had in Blood Simple was, we're talking about people making bad decisions and then bad decision after bad decision. Mm-hmm. And, we're sort of watching Blood Simple and screaming at the screen being like, what are you doing? Just call the police. Or what are you doing? Just call this other person. Or what are you doing? Don't bury this man alive. Don't stop. What are you doing?
Don't bury him alive.
Just stop it. Whereas this, you're getting bad decision after bad decision. You're sort of laughing along with him.
Yeah.
But then in the end, they do redeem themselves,
Yes.
and they do make the right decision. And then you are left with this idea of hope and like maybe that dream is going to actually happen for them.
Yeah, that's right. And there's a lot in here about like fatalism and people's natures. They talk about it like when in some of the prison scenes when they're with the prison counselor. He says, he's like, the prison counselor was there to help us understand why we were the way we were. And
right.
There's also like the brothers say to High on a few occasions, like, you're ignoring your nature. You're doing something contrary to your nature. And, but so like, ultimately, like, whereas in Blood Simple, like you say, they persist in their nature. They keep doing these things over and over. And the end of Blood Simple leaves us with this idea that it's going to keep happening. Whereas in this movie, it deviates from that. It takes the other road in the other way, and it shows us that they can break out of the cycle. That that high can straighten up and fly right. That they maybe they can have a family. Maybe they can, even the brothers go back to prison. They voluntarily walk back in the same hole that they dug out of. It's incredible. Right. So there's this idea in here that we can change and get better. And even even Nathan Arizona seems to have, because even though he's kind of the victim in this, his kid has been abducted. I never feel any kind of pity for him, because he's always so self-promoting and aggrandizing, and he seems to want to turn everything into a business opportunity. But even he at the end, sort of seems kind of redeemed in a way. And it's so, again, like, it's all very, very heartwarming.
Yeah, it's, again, thinking about Blood Simple, you have these normal people, somewhat like, law-abiding citizens that, again, start making terrible decisions and then end up becoming like the most horrid people. And then in this movie, you have people that are, specifically Hyde, who is the film is based around, obviously, is a criminal and in all intents and purposes, a bad person. And then throughout the film, he slowly, he falls in love and slowly starts to be redeemed. And then, he has slip ups and messes up, but then in the end, like you said, it's this idea of redemption and hope at the end that sort of makes the film feel end on a positive note, obviously, which feels fitting in this film. There's another thing you mentioned about the brothers going back to jail, like in the same way they came in. Which is amazing. Like the idea that these two brothers, there's all this family symbolism throughout the film. I think it's just, when you're talking about them going back into that hole, I think about them coming out of the hole, and it's like, there's this birth of them. It's like literally almost like a birth, they're getting dragged. He's screaming like a child. Like he's got all this like mud on him. Like, it's like, this is like a birth. He's crawling out and he's like screaming like a kid, and he just keeps yelling and he's pulling his brother out. Like,
who comes out the wrong way, by the way. The other brother comes out like in reverse. So he's almost like a backwards birth, It's funny. John Goodman must have been sore making this movie, because there are so many like protracted scenes of him just screaming, like laugh.
It's so great. Good.
So good.
When they're in the car and they realize the baby, I mean, it's so cartoonish. It's so over the top. But again, it feels like it works because of, they've set up these boundaries in the film. Like, we're making these absurd characters. We're making them over the top, we're not trying to base this in reality. We're trying to base this in absurdity. And within there, then you sort of get these moments of realism that you sort of pull from, and you're like, oh, that sort of works, and makes you sort of look at things differently and look at things more interesting, like, versus, like I was mentioning earlier, kind of like those other like weird baby movie comedies, the Look Who's Talkings and the 3 Men and a Baby. You're like, oh, this, like, they're trying to base all those, these comedies in a reality, right? And you're just sort of like, this, they don't necessarily work, because it makes it almost more authentic when they're trying to be something real, if that makes sense.
There's not nearly enough chase scenes in any of those movies, I feel like. People aren't loose enough with guns. Like that scene when he's running with the diapers through the grocery store and then through people's houses. But the cops are loose with the guns, I tell you. They're just letting go. And then everybody has a gun. Like every single clerk, every single cashier all pulls out with a shotgun or a handgun or whatever, and are just letting fly. And it's absolutely wild. It's so friggin' good. Like, the part of that scene too, there's a point, I think it's that one, I can't remember what, at one point a car whips around and they've got a bumper sticker on there, a Mondale Ferraro bumper sticker, which sort of goes back to the very very light political commentary of the film. It's
Right.
Walter Mondale. He was Jimmy Carter's VP back in '84, and then he won the Democratic nomination for the next, I think, in '88. No, sorry, in
Right.
'84. He had previously been Carter's VP in the '70s, and anyway, he chose for his running mate Geraldine Ferrero, who was the first woman ever chosen for that position. So a very progressive guy, very big on
Mhm.
social welfare, and he got absolutely hammered by Ronald Reagan and George Bush in the election. Like, it is
Right.
madness. If you look at a map of an electoral map of that year, it is Minnesota in blue and the rest of the country in red. It is shocking. And like, so, you think about how I've told you this before, how like today when I listen to the news or when I just look at the world, I feel like Elaine in Seinfeld watching Weekend at Bernie's, going, Bernie is dead, you morons. Just because he has sunglasses on, you think he's alive? And so, like, I have to imagine people like the Coens must have felt like they were living in, like, some kind of
Yeah.
deranged fantasy world, some kind of bizarro world, because they're looking out at, and seeing this, being like, what are you people doing? Like Bush and Reagan
Yeah.
again? Like,
Yeah.
and yeah, like, I mean, it's just they must have felt so overwhelmed, like, by the political landscape of the country. And I feel like this movie was almost a way for them to just scream at it and say, like,
Yeah.
yes, we are living in a cartoon right now. This is insane, people. Like,
Yeah.
oh man.
And I think that, it must have just been so much fun for them too to film this film,
Yeah.
to make this movie. And like you said, like they obviously have very strong ideologies and they subtly put them in their films, but like, if you're making a movie this sort of over the top, like they must have been just thought it was so funny at times and just crying, laughing at the performances,
Yeah.
specifically with Nicolas Cage and the brothers and stuff. And, it is sort of a sin that we haven't seen them come back together, Nicolas Cage and the Coen brothers, after this. Cause it feels like they were due for more, collaborations, I guess. And maybe we will in the future, but it's,
I saw
I don't know.
something, and I don't know how much truth there is to it, that they did not work well together, or like they
I
just
read that
didn't
as well.
they didn't get along great, and that's why we haven't seen a return.
Yeah, I think I've read that as well, and but I also sort of read that, like, which is a great idea. I don't know if it was Ethan or Joel sort of said it's better, to have to rein somebody in than to have to like try to push them to get to where they need to be, right? So like obviously they're sort of saying that Nicolas Cage was very over the top and zany and like wild,
Which you
in
need
his
for this.
which you need for this character, right? And they could have bring him back a bit, and that was probably difficult for them. But like again, it was probably would have been way harder for them to try to be like, no, like we need more, or we need
Yeah,
more. We, you know what I mean?
that's right.
Reining him,
That would get exhausting.
back. Exactly. So yeah, who knows? Maybe they will work together down the line. That would be interesting and fun. But I'm at that point in the episode where again, I'd love to know if the Coens can go 3 for 3 for us, and is Raising Arizona a hell of a picture for you?
Oh man, it's a tough one. Like I think you can tell by the tenor of the conversation that I really enjoyed this movie. Like this was fun.
Absolutely.
Um, this to me, like if I hadn't watched Anora and I just went off what was said of it, like what I read and what I heard from people, this is the kind of movie I would think I was getting, or something closer to this.
Really?
Well, just because like I think a lot of the nice things said of Anora can be more fairly said of this. Like this is a screwball comedy for me. This is madcap.
Right.
And this is tremendously well written. This is a great script. This is great dialogue. It's funny, and most amazingly, it is actually sweet, while still taking a bite out of the world. Like we said, there's things to be said. Like, they are saying things in this movie, while at the same time just presenting you with something totally absurd. And I think that's really incredible. I would have loved this. Got no nominations for anything. Like if you look through the list of like awards, like there was a couple of comedy like sort of critic bodies and stuff that nominated Cage and Holly Hunter. um, for their performances, but it didn't get anything at any of the big festivals or awards ceremonies. Nothing for
Right.
script, nothing for direction, and I think the direction in this is so good. Yeah, I would love it if this had won a Best Picture. I would think or had gotten a nomination. Sorry. Is it a hell of a picture? I don't know. I've been reevaluating what that means to me as we've been doing this, and I think
Yeah.
soon we've talked about this. We want to do a retrospective and talk about the films that we've already discussed and where we are with wrangling that term for each of us personally. I'm going to say no for this, even though I really loved it. I loved it, but hell of a picture, no. But man, if this had won Best Picture, I would think, yeah, well deserved.
You know, it's interesting. You sort of talk about the accolades, and this is actually, I think, 30th on AFI's 100 biggest laughs. Like, or I guess they have a list of the
Wow.
100 laughs, which is like the top 100 comedies, American-made comedies. And this was number 30. And like for context, I think Fargo is in the 90s on this list. So it's like very, you know, it is very high up there in thinking about it, like within the context of comedy in general. I think this is a movie that gets better with time. I think looking back at it and knowing what the Coen brothers have done since, and their sort of all their filmography, you know, I think this would have been a harder movie to sort of judge back when it was originally released.
Yeah.
Just because you're sort of like, even though, you know, it did get generally good reviews, you know, I know I had mentioned that Ebert kind of gave it, didn't like it, but like it was mostly positive. But again, I think it was sort of like, whoa, this is pretty over the top. And sort of going back and rewatching it had been a number of years for me. You know, I found myself like laughing out loud at times and just like really enjoying the process. But again, I don't think it was something that it was missing for me. I think it was more so just like, I love this movie, but like, again, if we're trying to think about what this idea of a hell of a picture is, like, yeah, I don't know if it ticks that box for me. Like if I think about this in comparison to like a Lebowski or Fargo, like I vastly love those movies, like way more than this one. So it's like, again, it's like, I'm not clamoring to go rewatch this. I'd rather say rewatch Blood Simple again and then like revisit this in like 5 or 6 years, you know, down the line. I'm like, oh yeah. So yeah, I agree. It's not a hell of a picture for me, but I think it's probably the best film that we've done to date that didn't get the nod for me. You know?
Yeah, that's a fair point. That's interesting. Because it is very, very good, like in so many ways. And like you say, it's not something that it did or didn't do that, you know, that sort of prevented it from ticking that last box for me. It's tough to say. I don't know if there was. I don't know if you can add or take away anything from this to make it a hell of a picture. I just think maybe sort of going back to people's natures, it's sort of, I think by its nature, it's just not going to be that, you know what I mean?
Yeah. And that sort of, in watching this too, you know, it sort of dawned on me that like, we really haven't done a lot of comedies.
Nope.
You know, and I think that we're due for doing maybe a bunch more comedies, you know, even in looking at our filmography, it's like Barbie. We did Barbie. And
Barbie's funny. Very funny.
Barbie's funny. Like there are funny elements to some of these movies, but like, gosh, I don't think we've done like any, like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I guess could be a comedy.
As much as any Tarantino movie is, I guess, because there's always, you know, comedy is always an important aspect of his films. But would I call it a pure comedy? No, I would not. You know.
Yeah. So, anyways, that's an interesting thing to note. So, yeah. So, you know, Raising Arizona, not a hell of a picture for us, but again, I think it's obviously, especially if you haven't seen it, you should be watching it. You should see it, and you should, you know, form your own opinion. But I think I
would say it's essential viewing. I think of it as essential viewing.
Yeah.
If you are interested in the Coens and interested in I think comedy filmmaking.
Yeah.
I would say it's like it's important that you watch this movie, and you will be glad that you did. But yeah, does it elevate itself beyond that? Not quite.
So speaking of that, speaking of the Coens and, where we're going next, we could go in a lot of directions. I mentioned Fargo, Big Lebowski. The next film in their, filmography is Miller's Crossing, sort of like a strong difference from this film, more like Blood Simple. But, we're going to jump ahead. We're going to jump into the future, past No Country for Old Men. And our next Coen Brothers film is going to be True Grit, which is a film that, David, you have not seen, correct?
I have not, but I'm led to believe it is truthful and gritty. So it better deliver on those promises. Yeah.
True Grit is a 2010 film. It was their follow-up to No Country for Old Men. Oh no, it wasn't. Sorry. Oh no, it was. They had two other films in there. They had Burn After Reading and A Serious Man. So they had sort of two comedies, dark comedies, and then they did True Grit. But True Grit is, it's an
hugely
adaptation.
popular. I remember when it came out. It was
yes,
massive, wasn't it?
And and it was a film that it's based on a novel. And then there was also a 1969 version of this film with John Wayne. So that's actually, it's one of the reasons we kind of wanted to do it was, this is a very interesting, it's, not only a remake, but then also an adaptation. So, we're not going to go back and rewatch the original, but, I'm sure there'll be things that will in our research that we'll kind of come across. And this has a crazy cast, Jeff Bridges and Matt Damon, Josh Brolin. So yeah, this is the sort of like, if you think about No Country as being a Western, if you sort of had to put it in a genre, like ish, this feels like a true, authentic Hollywood Western.
Yeah. Yeah, both in terms of its setting and I guess just all the staples of the genre. It definitely feels more true to form, more pure in that way. Just going off the poster, it looks to be it looks like it's fully embraced its Westernness. So yeah, looking forward to that. That'll be cool.
Yeah, that'll be fun. So okay, so we got True Grit next week. And then from there, we'll see, we'll see what we dive into. We might do another Coens, or we might switch things up, but you can also look forward to sort of our birthday, our first year anniversary of the show is coming up of Hell of a Picture. And we'll, we're going to have kind of like a birthday episode, anniversary episode. And, we'll have some fun stuff in there as well. So things to look forward to on the podcast. So for David Hollinshurst, my name is Andrew Bartlett, and this has been another rip-roaring episode of Hell of a Picture.